Welcome back everyone, it's Aric from Barricade, and here today we are back on the channel checking out the very hype new Mew VMAX in today's deck profile. So I think Mew is going to be one of the set's, more prominent mascots for a pretty good reason. I think it's going to be among one of the better archetypes that we are getting in the new Fusion Strike set. And I do think there's actually a few different ways you could take a Mew VMAX deck. And for that reason, I actually wrote up a brief article for our patrons detailing some of those additional deck building options, different techs, etc., that you might want to potentially include in your Mew VMAX list going forward as well. So if you guys want to get some bonus content and help support the channel in the process, of course, I'll have a link to that down below in the description. Or alternatively, if you guys want an easier way at showing your support, you can always just crush that like button. It genuinely does help get this video seen by more people. It helps me beat my arch nemesis, the pesky YouTube algorithm. But with all that out the way, let's jump into this deck profile and see how it's going to look. So up first, we have 4 copies of Mew V in the deck, of course. So that's going to be our base form of Mew VMAX. And I do think the base form Mew actually has a few good traits going for it. It does have free retreat, which is great. It has this first attack for a psychic energy. We search our deck for an energy and attach it to, I believe it's one of our Fusion Strike Pokemon. And then its other attack for a psychic and colorless to 70, and you shuffle Mew and all cards attached to it back into your deck. I think both these attacks honestly aren't too bad. If we are going second, this first attack on Mew can be nice. And also the second attack is an attack we can choose to copy with our Mew VMAX. So in theory, if a Mew VMAX gets targeted down by our opponent, gets swung on, we can theoretically shuffle it back into our deck and deny them 3 prizes in the process. So both these attacks do have some utility. But of course, the main attacker in the deck is going to be 3 copies of Mew VMAX. One of these new Fusion Strike Pokemon, much like the Mew V as well. But this guy, again, free retreat, dark weakness, fighting resistance, 310 HP, and 2 different attacks as well. The first one for 2 colorless energy. We choose an attack on one of our bench Fusion Strike Pokemon, and we get to use this as this attack. And its other attack for 2 psychic energy does 130 and goes through any effects on your opponent's Pokemon. So the second attack definitely going to be good if you do run into things like Zamazenta V, Decidueye, etc. But the first attack on Mew VMAX is definitely going to be the main one we're going to be looking at. But the main attack we're probably going to be copying is going to be our Genesect, just because it has the highest base damage out of any of our Pokemon. But of course, we will be able to copy attacks from, like I said, Mew V, as well as some of our other Fusion Strike Pokemon that you're going to see in this deck. But the upside of Mew, as opposed to powering up those Pokemon, has 310 HP, which means it can probably sustain a hit from one of our opponent's Pokemon. And also, we don't have to match the energy cost of the card that we are copying the attacks from. But as I mentioned, we are playing 4 copies of Genesect V as well. This is going to be kind of like the heart and soul of these Fusion Strike decks, just because of this ability. It allows us to draw cards until the number of cards in our hand matches the amount of Fusion Strike Pokemon that we have in play. So of course, guys, if we have 6 Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, we can draw until we have 6. And this does stack. So of course, if we have 4 Genesect in play, we can do this over and over and over, seeing a ton of cards every single turn with this thing. And Genesect, as I mentioned, does have an attack that Mew is going to be copying for 2 metal and a colorist is 210, and this Pokemon can't attack on the next turn. But of course, guys, if we are copying this attack with Mew, we only need 2 colorist energy. We don't need this full attack cost on the actual Genesect V. From there, we have 1 copy of Latias as well. Latias is kind of a cool card. We are playing it basically just as a target for Mew to copy attacks from. It has the Dyna Barrier attack. It does 70, and then we can't be damaged by our opponent's Pokemon VMAX on the next turn. So 70 base damage is a little bit low, unfortunately, but luckily Fusion Strike decks do have access to power tablets, which can creep our damage up to make sure we're not just like 5-shotting everything with this attack. But even still, we are in an extremely VMAX heavy format, and as a result, I think Latias is probably going to be useful in at least like 3/4 of your matchups with this deck. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Oricorio to round out our Pokemon. So Oricorio has this ability that is going to reduce the damage done to our Fusion Strike Pokemon by 20, and it does have an attack as well, which can be useful for a fire and colorless, or just the 2 colorless if we're attacking with Mew VMAX. We can put 5 damage counters on our opponent's Pokemon any way that we like. So believe it or not, I actually do like this attack, just because if we do whiff a 1-shot, we can always just copy this attack with Mew to pick off something on the bench, which is nice. But the 20 damage reduction is the main reason we're choosing to play Oricorio, just to make our Pokemon a little bit tankier. But looking at our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Peony. So we discard our hand, and then we search our deck for 2 trainer cards and put them into our hand. So up until now, by and large, Professor's research has kind of just outclassed Peony. But now that we have Genesect V in the mix, I actually think Peony might be a little bit better, because not only can we get those exact 2 trainer cards that we might want, but also even afterwards, we can still refill our hand, hopefully back up to 6 as well, and keep barreling through our deck at an even higher pace. And also, we are a deck that is very susceptible to things like Path to the Peak, so being able to guarantee those counter stadiums is really valuable, and that's something research might not always be able to do for you. So up next from there, we have 2 copies of Marnie though, just for a little bit of hand disruption. So of course, our opponent's going to get 4 cards, we're going to get 5. And even though this form of draw power is not as strong as something like Professor's Research typically, we have Genesect V to refill our hand, so we get some disruption while still being able to see a ton of cards in a given turn. Next up, we have a new supporter card that is going to be Elisa's Sparkle. So this says, choose 2 of your Fusion Strike Pokemon. For each of those Pokemon, search your deck for a Fusion Strike energy and attach it to those Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. Usually these types of cards wouldn't be that great just because they are a little bit slow and don't allow you to see a lot of cards for turn. But again, because we have Genesect V, that really offsets the lack of draw power that would normally be such a big downside to a supporter like this. So this is great, especially if we whip an energy attachment at some point, or our opponent knocks out maybe our Mew VMAX that is our only Pokemon with energy. Elisa's Sparkle does give us a way to immediately power up a new attacker in a single turn. And then from there, we're playing 3 copies of Bossasaurus just to choose what we might want to attack into. But moving on to our stadium cards, we have 3 copies of Rose Tower in the deck. So Rose Tower, of course, will allow us to draw until we have 3 cards in our hand. You know, I've tried a few different stadiums in this deck so far, and Rose Tower definitely feels like the best stadium to grab off your Peony. If you do get Path to the Peak and you don't really have many Genesect set up just yet, you can instantly bump Path, play the other trainer card that's in your hand that you got off Peony more than likely, and see another 3 cards. But with that being said, we are also choosing to play 1 copy of Old Cemetery in the deck. One thing I have really been liking in my Fusion Strike decks is to play some sort of split of stadium cards, just because we do want to be able to play down our hand to draw more cards with Genesect. And if we're playing all the same stadium cards, sometimes that might result in us having our stadium in play and a second one in hand. But if we do play some sort of split, if we have, let's say for example, a Rose Tower in play, well guess what? If we do need to bump our stadium to play it on our hand, we can do so with Old Cemetery, whereas we cannot do that with another copy of Rose Tower. And Old Cemetery is another stadium I think really lands well in a deck like this. Whenever a player attaches an energy to one of their non-psychic Pokemon, they take 2 damage counters. And with us being largely a psychic deck, we don't really have to worry about this. So I've messed around with a couple different splits of these stadiums in the deck. At one point I had an even split between 2 of them, but I like Rose Tower in the early game, especially when we're trying to get set up. But if you do want a more even split of stadiums, I don't think that's awful either. But checking out our item cards, we have 3 copies of Switch in the deck. So of course, one of the big downsides to Genesect's attack, even though it does do a solid 210 damage, we cannot attack with that Pokemon on the next turn. So we are going to need copies of Switch to be able to pull that off. Because Mew has free retreat, we retreat to the bench, play Switch, come back to the active, and we can attack with the same Mew if need be. But with that being said, we are also choosing to play 1 copy of Air Balloon in the deck as well. You know, Mew VMAX has free retreat, which is great, but our other Pokemon do not. So I do like having a way to give our other Pokemon free retreat if we need to. Up next from there, we have 4 copies of Power Tablet's definitely going to be one of the most important cards that the Fusion Strike decks are going to have. So it's an item that buffs our damage for our Fusion Strike cards by 30. And of course, these do stack. So in theory, if we do play all of them, we can do plus 120, which is pretty insane. And this is another reason why I actually do like Peony in this deck over something like Research, just because there are going to be turns where we want maybe 2, maybe even 3 Power Tablets, and a card like Peony is going to do a much better job at finding those specific items on the turns that we might need them. Up next from there, though, we have 4 copies of Quick Ball in the deck to find our basic Pokemon. Quick Ball is also nice because it does force us to discard cards, which can be another good way at playing down our hands to draw more cards with Genesect. From there, we also have 3 copies of Fog Crystal in the deck. So Fog Crystal, of course, allows us to find a basic Psychic Pokemon or basic Psychic Energy. So of course, guys, we want to find a Mew V and an Energy on our first turn no matter what. That's like the big thing we just have to see, and Fog Crystal obviously is going to help out with that. We also have 3 copies of Evolution Incense though, just because we do need some ways to actually searching out our Mew VMAX in the deck. None of our other search cards will really allow us to do that. Next up from there though, we have another interesting search card that is coming out in Fusion Strike, and that's going to be Battle VIP Pass. I do say this is a card that I kind of expected to be really bad, but honestly has been feeling pretty good ever since I put it in the list. So we can only play this on our first turn, but you get to search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. Being able to slap this down and just grab 2 Genesect or a Mew V and a Genesect feels so good. And the fact that we're playing Peony means that if we open up with Peony on our first turn going second, we can actually just immediately grab this to guarantee 2 Pokemon. Next up, we have one copy of Ordinary Rod in the deck. So of course we can get 2 Pokemon and or 2 basic energy, shuffle them back into our deck. So we'll say I think this card is one of the more cuttable cards in the list, but I want a way at recycling Latias if need be, and I guess to a lesser extent Oricorio as well. Because of course Mew can only copy the attacks of our Pokemon on our bench, so if our opponent does target down our Latias, knocks it out, I want a way at being able to reuse that without having to play a second copy. But definitely I think one of the more cuttable cards if there is something you are looking to find space for in this deck. And for our last trainer card, we're playing one copy of Tool Scrapper just to get rid of those pesky tool cards on our opponent's field, like Tool Jammer as an example, or maybe Cape of Toughness if our opponent is playing some sort of 2-prize deck like Suicune V or Zacian V. This will allow us to be able to more easily one-shot those Pokemon. But going on to our energy cards, of course, we have 4 copies of Fusion Strike energy in the deck. Definitely going to be a very important card here. New special energy for, of course, Fusion Strike Pokemon. And it provides any energy while attached to them, and the Pokemon they're attached to cannot be affected by our opponent's abilities. So of course that means things like Inteleon's Quick Shooting won't affect our Pokemon, or something like Umbreon VMAX, or even the new Inteleon VMAX, just to name a few examples. And also of course we can accelerate it from deck with Elisa Sparkle. Up next from there though, we have 4 copies of Capture Energy in the deck. One thing I love about Mew VMAX is that it does have a 2 colorless energy attack cost, which gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of what energies we might want to play in our deck. And we are a deck that basically wants a full bench at any given point, and Capture Energy plus all of our other search cards are going to allow us to easily fill up that bench with things like Genesect to draw a ton of cards. And to round out our deck list, we have 3 copies of Psychic Energy in the deck as well. You know, typically something like Horror Psychic Energy would be a little bit better, but since we are playing Fog Crystal, I think having the out to these basic Psychic Energies might be a little bit better in this instance. So that's going to wrap up my current list for Mew VMAX. But like I said at the beginning of this video, guys, I've had a lot of cards coming in and out of this list, and I'll probably still iterate on this a little bit more. But I think this should be a solid starting point. I think this is pretty consistent. And like I said too at the beginning of this video, if you guys want some more Mew VMAX content, I will have that link to that exclusive article for our patrons. That way you can see some of the other viable deck building options that you could go with in this deck. But with that being said, guys, what do you think about this list that I'm using, as well as just your thoughts on this archetype as a whole? Let me know your full thoughts down below in the comment section. But if you guys did enjoy today's video, be sure to crush that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. That way you'll stay up to date with the rest of my Fusion Strike content. And if you want to take your support to the next level, like I mentioned, you can become a patron, or you can pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. I'll have links to those down below in the description. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.